What is the most effed up thing that happened in a children's TV show? Henry the Tank Engine was bricked up inside an abandoned tunnel for having anxiety, while Ringo Starr mocked him. Too many episodes of Hey Arnold. Like finding out Stoop Kid stayed on his stoop because he was abandoned there and was homeless, but hopelessly waiting for someone to come back for him. How Monkey Man was mentally ill and also homeless. That one where you learn Grandpa and his sister had a lifelong rift because the only good thing in their life as children, their puppy, got killed by a car in front of them and they each blamed the other. How Lyle and her dad are squatters to keep from being homeless. How the kids on the show routinely get mugged. Or how Mr. Yoon hates Christmas because that's the anniversary of the day he handed his baby daughter off to an American soldier to get her out of the war zone, because he wasn't sure they'd survive, then spent the rest of his life working to immigrate to America to try and find her, only having the name of a city to work from, and ended up missing her whole childhood, because he was too poor to hire a private investigator. Until Helga literally sold the shoes off her feet to hire one to make Arnold happy. Oh, and how Helga is obsessed with Arnold, because she grew up neglected by an alcoholic mother and aggressive narcissistic father, who only cared about her older sister, and Arnold was literally the first person in her entire life to show her any kindness when, as a preschooler, he offered to share his umbrella because her parents forgot to take her to her first day of preschool, and she had to walk in the rain, by herself, with no coat, as a 4-year-old in what we can only assume is New York City. So yeah, that show was supremely jacked up. Not really as messed up as a lot of these, but still creepy. That episode of Tom and Jerry where Tom gets depressed and sits on a railroad track, waiting for a train to come. Then Jerry comes to join him sitting down. The episode cuts to black and ends, and it never mentions it after that. Strange. Either the series finale of Alf in which Alf is captured by the government presumably to be experimented on, or the series finale of Dinosaurs in which the entire civilization is destroyed. I was about to post the Dinosaurs one. The finale was them just staring out the window at snow, and while I don't think they knew what was going to happen, we sure as F did. There was an episode of SpongeBob where Squidward got brain damage and thought he was a baby. Then the rest of the episode is just SpongeBob and Patrick throwing him about, and new SpongeBob is just plain sadistic at times. Soupy sales in 1965. New Year's Day incident. On January 1, 1965, miffed at having to work on the holiday, Sales ended his live broadcast by encouraging his young viewers to tiptoe into their still sleeping parents' bedrooms, and remove those funny green pieces of paper with pictures of US presidents from their pants and pocketbooks. Put them in an envelope and mail them to me, Soupy instructed the children. Several days later, substantial amounts of money had begun arriving in the mail. Sales stated that the total amount received was in the thousands of dollars but qualified that by stating that much of that was in play money. Sales said he had been joking and that whatever real money had been sent would be donated to charity, but his parents' complaints increased. News management suspended Sales for 2 weeks. There is an episode of Scooby-Doo, one of the ones with Scooby, Shaggy and Scrappy only, where they are being chased around a pyramid by a mummy and they beat him by unraveling him. But then when they are leaving they turn around and footsteps are following them in the sand. They run away, footsteps return to the pyramid and then the episode ends. Only example in classic Scooby I think where the monster was real. Fair to say I've been scared of mummies ever since I'm in my 20s. Honestly, one of my favorite things about the movies was that the monster was always real. Man, that Cajun Cat People one was insane. Movie rather than TV show, but if I think of, that's really dark for kids, my mind always jumps to Clayton's death at the end of Tarzan. Dude accidentally hanging himself with a vine is pretty dark. I mean, Clayton was also basically an allegory for slavery and genocide with his obsession with killing rare specimens, and the way he caged up all Tarzan's family and put them on boats to be shipped back to England. So yeah, dark end to a dark story. There's this Hey Arnold episode called The Ghost Bride, and the story is basically that this lady was madly in love with her fiancé, but was stood up at the altar because he had fallen in love with her sister, and married her the very next day. So the lady goes berserk and puts on her wedding dress, gets an axe from her basement, walks to the newlywed couple's home, kills them both in their beds, and when the cops come, she's rocking back and forth in a rocking chair next to the bodies, throwing rice on them and humming the wedding march. To finish it all off, she immediately jumps out of the window and kills herself. The Looney Tunes, where the bulldog, I think his name is Caesar or Romeo anyway, he wants to keep a kitten. His owner is already mad, so he tried to hide kitten. Stuff happens and he ends up believing the kitten was baked into cookies, and the owner gives him a cat-shaped cookie, and he's crying puddles of tears and grabs the cookie pretending it's the kitty, completely traumatized. There was a very special anti-drug episode of the 80s cartoon Brave Star. In this episode, a couple of kids get hooked on a new drug. At the end of the episode, one of the kids died from an overdose, 30 plus years later, and I'm not sure how many children's shows even today would kill a kid. Captain Planet did the same thing. A drug called Bliss, that makes the user happy and all their problems go away, but also makes them reckless and not fear injury or death, and is extremely addictive. Linka's cousin gets addicted and then manages to get her hooked, but she quits after he dies of an overdose. In the original Powerpuff Girls there was this episode called Butter Crush that I never really forgot. Buttercup sort of got into a relationship with the leader of the Gone Green gang, but the leader kept on taking advantage of her and she had no idea. It gets to the point where she ditches her sisters to hang out with him, but he just keeps on using her. Of course at the end she realized what was going on and beat him up, though. I guess it really wasn't that dark or anything, but it always made me feel sick inside when I saw it. Maybe it was partly about age difference, but it was the first time I saw a relationship like that in a cartoon. There was the episode where a deer with human fingers breaks both of Finn's knees and he goes into a coma only to wake up in a weird Twilight Zone hellscape. Or the one where the cookie leaps off a cliff and tries to kill himself and gets taped back together in an insane asylum. The entire Mountain of Matu episode with Lemon Grab going on about his ego death. Finn openly admitting he suffers from PTSD due to compartmentalizing all his traumas, Finn Vault, and deals with it by kissing Princess until I feel better. I might be reading too far into it, but it sure sounds like he's acting out hypersexually to deal with his trauma. And those are just the ones I can remember offhand. Not exactly on the children's show itself, but about 20 years ago during a midday episode of the Spider-Man cartoon, the news broke in to cover a live high-speed chase that ended in a standoff on a popular Los Angeles freeway. The suspect abruptly blew the top of his own head off with a rifle on live television. The top of his head literally flapped open like can of SpaghettiOs. Camera caught everything. I assure you, kids watching that were never the same. Not actually a children's show, but the Supper Hour local news broadcast in the somewhat rural region where I grew up, so family-friendly news, basically. It was Easter, so they decided it'd be cute to have the hosts in chairs away from the usual desk, and to place a low pen, like a sandbox, on the floor in front of them, and put some cute rabbits in the pen to just sort of hop around inside the pen, and eat some grass and be cute during the broadcast. So during the broadcast, the rabbits started doing what rabbits do. They started hopping onto each other and doing their darndest to make some more little rabbits. The horrified hosts finally noticed this. Live broadcast though, so they had to keep trucking and talking. The single camera wasn't really able to cut away or switch angles or tile up away from the rabbits for whatever reason. The broadcast finally cut to a clip of something else, so the rabbits were off screen for a bit. The camera angle was moved up so that when the hosts came back, the rabbits were out of sight. Wonder how many horrified parents phoned in to complain. Lol. Nobody's mentioned the show Are You Afraid of the Dark? That shit was the most psychologically damaging show I ever watched as a child. The one that has haunted me to this day was an episode in which one way or another a young boy gets locked up in a jail cell and gets left behind in the freaking dark. That's how the episode ends, with him shouting and crying in the dark. Some Franz Kafka-esque right there. Haven't seen it in years, but there's this episode of the Powerpuff Girls, where they somehow accidentally time travel years into the future and Townsville is just destroyed, because things happened and they weren't there to stop them. Everybody they know in Townsville is either scared of them or hates them for leaving. I don't know why, it always just stuck with me after watching that episode of The Simpsons where Homer's mom comes back after years of being absent only to have to go on the run again. Homer crying and running after the car still haunts me today. Also from another Simpsons episode, there was a short clip where Homer took a picture of himself every day for 20 years or something similar. You watch him go from a happy toddler, then watching his parents argue in the background. The house starts falling apart, his father Abe looks depressed. It goes into his teen years and he starts drinking and drinking, he's now depressed. Honestly, I think they should have won an award for that. It was like a work of art, absolutely heartbreaking yet beautiful. I used to watch the cartoon series 7 Cities of Gold before school in the mornings. Every episode ended with a short educational bit about Middle American history and such. Show was set during the Spanish invasion of the New World. Well, one of the history segments was about the Aztec ritual sacrifices and shows a man actually sacrificing a chicken by cutting its head off. And they show the rest of the chicken running around without a head. HR puff and stuff. All of it. As a kid I had recurring nightmares about being turned into a bronze mushroom statue. Never had any idea where these dreams came from. but they were always the same and left me terrified of eating mushrooms. A few years ago when they dumped all the HR Puff and Stuff eps on YouTube, I discovered this dream that haunted my early childhood came pretty much scene for scene from that show. My mom probably plopped me in front of the tube as a toddler and ended up putting me off mushrooms for life. The good old 1970s. Might be too late, but about 10 to 15 years ago, there was this show called Mr. Meaty. It was these two puppets who would work at a burger store in the mall. Anyways, one of them got a tapeworm and the food kept disappearing on the guy who had it and they had no clue. Anyways, they used a fishing rod to get the tapeworm out, and a customer saw it and swallowed it. It effed me up when I was 10. Well, it's definitely not the most effed up thing that ever happened in a TV show, but it's worth sharing. Back in the early 70s there was a kids TV show called Wonderama. At a certain point in the show, the host would ask the kids in the audience if something nice happened to them. This was live TV. One of the kids in my neighborhood, Nicky Ladoni, somehow got a ticket and there he was on TV. Everyone in the whole school had tuned in just to see him. When Bob McAllister the host went out into the audience with his mic, we couldn't believe it when he picked Nicky. "What's special that happened to you, Nicky?" he asks, and Nicky replies back with a big smile on his face, "My grandma died." I imagine looking back on it that they must have had a 15 seconds delay on the broadcast to catch things like this, but for some reason it went out over the air. Friggin', Nicky Ladoni. Lol. For me, it was an episode of MLP, where three little girl ponies called the Cutie Mark Crusaders get severely bullied by a visiting cousin, Babseed. I mean, this girl was threatening the CMC, kicking them out of their own clubhouse and terrorizing them. Finally, the CMC pull a prank to get even on Babseed, only for her tragic backstory to be revealed, that Babseed was visiting the family because she, herself, was severely bullied in her home city. In the end, the CMC are punished and made to apologize to Babseed. I get f***ing furious at this episode, because the adults of the situation took in a troubled kid and left them around other kids without informing the kids of the situation. If the adults had taken 5 minutes to explain to the CMC Babseed's situation beforehand, they would have been better prepared for her behavior and understood her better. If the adults had bothered actually spending time with Babseed to make sure she was adjusting well, she wouldn't have teamed up with the local bullies in the first place. I feel like the whole episode is a case for how communication between kids and adults is key when dealing with troubled youth, and it breaks my heart that the CMC were punished for rightfully defending themselves against a bully. The lesson of the episode is one of the worst for kids: don't fight back against bullies or you're a bully yourself. Screw defending yourself or teaching a bully they can't get away with being a jerk, just roll over and take it. One of the best Invader Zim episodes is about Zim throwing rubber piggies into a time machine to cripple, and eventually murder his human adversary, Dib. Zim watches and laughs through a TV screen the whole time. Another is about Zim harvesting organs from school children, and replacing them with ordinary objects, to appear more human before a school wellness check. That one is shot like a straight horror at times in homage to Alien. Early 2000s Nickelodeon was wild. Courage the Cowardly Dog gave me nightmares for ages. Also that episode of Dora where her and Boots go to pick some blueberries but they were actually stealing a bear's blueberries, and it chased them, seemingly with the intent of hurting/killing them. 5-year-old me never finished the episode I wrapped myself in blankets to calm down and cried. I had an irrational fear of bears because of that episode until I was 12. Jimmy Savile. The man was extremely respected in the United Kingdom, he was even knighted by Queen Elizabeth. Then, after he died, it came out he had molested literally hundreds of children and some adults. He was part of an influential ring of child abusers, although Savile was one of the most prolific. Some of the youngest children involved were 8 years old. The worst part is that victims had been coming forwards during the 50-odd years he'd been active in entertainment, to the police and to the media. And there was no investigation. It was only when Savile died that things were investigated, and a fraction of the horrors the establishment and influential entertainers in Britain had brought to the surface. And a similar pattern is repeating now today, with Prince Andrew's connection to American financier and human trafficker and Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. Back in the 1960s, our teacher showed us an educational television series every day at a certain time on science. No tapes back then, I'm quite sure it was a live broadcast sponsored by the province of Ontario. One episode was about measuring things. The scientists demonstrated some measuring techniques and then asked, how do you measure the volume of a human body? Well, the answer is you fill a tank with a measured amount of water, right up to the level of a spigot, then immerse the body, and measure the amount of water displaced. He filled the tank and then brought in this young adolescent girl in a white bathing suit to immerse herself into the tank. I remember she had to hold her breath at the end to get all the way under. Then she stepped out of the tank, and her white one-piece bathing suit had become absolutely transparent when wet. Our teacher did not panic. He stared at the screen for a moment or two in disbelief and then kind of smiled and shrugged and switched it off. Well, I remember the lesson.